July 18th, 2014. It's the very day that Dan Markel was gunned down in his Tallahassee driveway, shot in the face twice by two hitmen hired by the Adelson family. It turns out on that day, his post-divorce attorney was preparing to file paperwork that could have changed everything in Dan Markel's bitter divorce from Wendi Adelson. So you've got to ask the question, was that the moment that the plot against him boiled over?
Welcome to the global phenomenon, Surviving the Survivor. Here's your host, Emmy Award-winning journalist, Joel Waldman.
What's up, SCS Nation? Welcome to Surviving the Survivor and our continuing coverage of the Dan Markel murder and justice for Dan. We now have Donna Adelson facing the rest of her life in state prison. And in Florida, life is life. Again, this is Surviving the Survivor, the show that brings you the very best guests in all of true crime, and two of the best guests tonight. Here he is. I'll just bring him in right now. Stephen Webster is one half of Webster and Baptiste, attorneys at law. And if you were watching our coverage, I put up, happened to drive by their law firm in Tallahassee, and they had a sign. They have a digital marquee out front that said "Justice for Dan." And this is very personal to both of them. Again, Stephen working on behalf of Dan Markel in the post-divorce portion that he was dealing with against Wendi Adelson. And then Louis Baptiste, who's going to hop on in just a moment. He was a student of Dan Markel at FSU Law. And tonight we're going to talk about a bunch of things, but in particular, that couple of days sort of leading up. And before we get to the 18th, that fateful day, Stephen, do you recall the time you talked to him, I guess, just before the day his life was taken from him? And where was he at mentally? Where were you at with the divorce at that point?
Yes, I had drafted the first draft of the request for admissions. I think some of your viewers probably know what I'm talking about, but it was the filing that we were supposed to file on July 18th. And I had kind of like finalized a solid rough draft on the Thursday and had emailed it to him. And we'd spoken on the phone, and we agreed that he was going to, look at it overnight, and that we would reconvene in the morning and talk. So Danny seemed fine to me. I mean, he didn't seem any different. I think he was at peace with the fact that these things had to happen. So it wasn't like he was, I didn't sense like he was, struggling, with it mentally.
And how, so prior to July 18th, roughly how long had you been retained by Dan leading up to that date? I mean, how long were you guys sort of together as attorney and client?
I think it was like late April when I first started to talk to him or met with him. Mm-hmm. Right around May.
And what was that experience like for you? Because now you've got a guy that went to Harvard undergrad, Harvard Law, and he's a law professor at FSU, and he's asking you to be his attorney. Any like slight intimidation there that you're gonna screw up a motion or something, or filing?
No, I don't think you can do this job scared. If you're scared, you're probably gonna screw up for sure. So no, I was concerned how our interpersonal relationship was going to work, because there can only be one captain of a ship. And if you're asking me to be your captain, then I'm going to be your captain, and I was kind of worried that given his background and his resume, that it was going to be difficult for him to totally trust me to guide the litigation. So I was a little bit concerned about that. But after I met him for the first time, I just felt like that was something we could manage. And no, but it was an honor to represent somebody, a man of that caliber, and like you said, for him to trust me enough to say, yeah, I trust that guy being my advocate. That certainly didn't diminish my pride. I'll say that.
Willow Armadillo, good name. Stephen, thank you for coming on. So moved with the story you shared, and we appreciate the super chat. So here's a little bit of the backstory. We had one day in court, and of course I was up there for the entire trial, and I had Stephen on, I think with John Singer and Tim Jansen, and I was having all kinds of technical issues. And it just turned out that during that time where I was having some issues, Stephen sort of dropped a bomb telling us, I don't think people really knew this story. So Stephen's kind of back here to re-explain it, and then we'll get into some other things, and hopefully Louis is going to hop on. But Stephen, give us sort of the background here. So you had been working again since April. It's now July of 2014. You're, counsel for Dan Markel, and you believe, and I guess Dan believes, that there's some sort of financial fraud involved in some aspects of the divorce, and you're literally set to file something on that very day where his life is taken. Let's hold it right there, because there's some interesting things that happen the morning of where you have to call him back. But as it pertains to this financial fraud, when did you or Dan come to this conclusion that maybe something more nefarious was going on financially? And when did you guys decide you're going to file something?
Well, Dan had already filed basically a motion kind of outlining what his allegations as far as failing to disclose, identify an account, a TIAA CREF account with, I can't remember how much money was in it. I think it was close to $50,000. And then there was another account. She also had diamonds, that earrings and rings, I believe, that she didn't disclose. So he had already filed that, and he told me, he said, it was his poison pill, is what he called it, that he put in the marital settlement agreement, that if it was discovered that one of the parties, either party, had concealed assets and had not been 100% candid in their financial affidavit and financial disclosures, that it would amount to a material breach of the agreement, essentially, and that it would be, from that point forward, it would be kind of construed as a breach of contract. So he, the reason why he sprang that on her was because of Donna's conduct towards the children, and with respect to Dan and Wendy as well. And so that was, I think, what he always thought he would have, like an ace up his sleeve, that if there was some sort of, activity that was really, that was dividing him from his children, that he was going to use that as a hammer. And so he had already filed that, and then that he retained me after that was filed.
And now, the thumbnail for the episode is basically the days leading up, which is what we're talking about right now. And then we'll get into some of the trial stuff. But at any point in the days leading up to his murder, and just to be clear, he's shot on the 18th of July, 2014, but he actually succumbs to his injury. So technically he dies the next day. But at any point, did he say to you, I'm scared that, this family's unhinged, that they could try to either attack me or do something to mess with my credibility or actually physically harm me? Were there concerns from him in any of those regards?
He didn't express those to me. And frankly, he was pretty dang serene about even any reputational damage at that point. I think he was just so confident that he had the evidence and she didn't ultimately. So he didn't express those. His concern was Donna hurting his relationship with his children. He was very animated about that. And he was upset that Wendy wasn't abiding by the terms of the marital settlement agreement insofar as how he was supposed to have additional access to the children. Like, if she, for some reason, couldn't keep the children overnight, then he was supposed to have a right of first refusal. Hang on one second, Joel.
Sure, no problem.
Hey, bud.
I love it. He's talking to Louis, I bet. So I'll just, I'm going to ask.
You want to say what?
I got you muted, Stephen. Don't worry. This is why I love podcasting. Imagine doing this on CNN. It'd be awesome.
Working from Cohen, so I don't know if we can resend it. Maybe they can resend it, Lou.
COE, please resend the invite to Louis.
Maybe she's going to send it to you, bud. All right. Sorry about that, y'all.
No, You got to take. This is why I love podcasting. So, Stephen, there's a comment here from Only Reels. Wendy was going to be found guilty of fraud 100% and lose her law license and her career in life, basically. Dan had to be taken out before that filing. For Wendy, that was the more of a motive than relocation. What do you what's up, Louis? What do you make of this comment?
I look, I think they were concerned about the filing. I think she knew what she had done. And they didn't know what I was going to do with it. They didn't know exactly what I was going to file. But look, it's clear they were already in the works of plotting his death even before I told their lawyer. I told their lawyer on June 24th that what I was going to be filing. Now, Dan had already made the allegations, so that she had committed the fraud in his filing, and so that was already out there in the ether before Garcia and Rivera ever came up here. So, I mean, those allegations in general, and that her being exposed for that there's no doubt in my mind that it was a substantially motivating factor for her. And, I personally did believe that it posed a threat to her ability to continue practicing law. The bar, the Florida bar, can be forgiving on a lot of things. But they keep lawyers on a very tight leash when it comes to dishonesty and fraud and like stealing trust account monies from your clients, even if it's nominal amounts. The Florida bar, that's the kind of stuff that will get you disbarred. And so, that was the reason. I'm sorry, I'm kind of like scattering this story around, but that was the reason why I wanted to meet with her attorney to see if there was any way that we could try to stop that litigation before it went to that degree.
Yeah.
Where,
And did Wendy know? This is the next question. Did Wendy know the fraud would be filed, and did she know the date? Like, was July 18th the date that stuck out to Wendy?
I mean, I told her lawyer for exactly that. But that was why I was calling Danny that morning, because that was the deadline I gave them, and that's why I called Danny 30 minutes after he was shot, because we were going to finalize it, and it was going to be filed that day. I mean, I went back and looked at it, and it was kind of creepy. Because, like the last time the file had been modified was July 18th, 2014 at like 1:44 p.m.
Wow. And we're gonna get some of the more details. We've got the other half here, Louis Baptiste. Right before we get to you, Louis, looking presidential with the red tie today, Louis. But to Webster, one more question here from Sunny Days, just to round out this little part of it. And by the way, I just spoke to Ruth. Ruth gave us a little bit of time, and it's going to be posted under our video tab basically once the show is over. So you can go over, click the video tab, and you will find Ruth Markel talking about the case and about the trial to us. So we appreciate Ruth doing that. But Webster, shouldn't that investigation, we're talking about this fraud investigation now, which is kind of a curveball in this whole case, shouldn't it still go forward regarding the fraud to include his lawyer, I guess? I mean, what happens with that at that time? I mean, was there any effort to move it forward?
No, I mean, at that time, I was just stunned, kind of reeling from everything. And, my only concern at that point was the criminal investigation. So I just kind of decided the best thing for me to do for a lot of years was to do nothing. That's why I didn't do any media or anything like that. I just wanted to kind of stand back and cross my fingers and pray that they were going to be held accountable. So I just kind of never did. I mean, I don't think there's anything that would stop the bar from investigating it now. And I do think it should be investigated. I mean, she did it.
Yeah, there you go. So maybe it's not too late. I don't know about the statute of limitations or what the deal is. I'm no lawyer. But Louis Baptiste, you are a lawyer. You were also Dan Markel's student at FSU. And now another one has been convicted. I don't know how much of this trial you actually got to watch, because I know you work a ton. But I'm sure you saw the verdict. And when you heard count one, first-degree murder, guilty, was that something that you had expected, that you thought was obvious, that you were relieved to hear? What emotion ran through your veins?
And so, again, thank you for having me back. It was a complicated emotion. This is probably the first trial where I didn't get to be in the courtroom for at least 30-40% of it. And I wanted to be there, just had a new obligation that that kind of held my time hostage. But it was complicated because when Charlie Adelson was convicted, it was easy, right? Charlie was easy to see as a villain, right? Rich young guy, rich kid, thinking he was, this mobster of Miami planning deaths and hiring hitmen. It was easy to envision that. When Sigfredo he's the actual trigger man, right? It's Magwana, she's the connector. With Donna Adelson, it was tougher because, in Markel's class, he had this thing about this term he used to teach called the circle of justice, right? And I remember it from 13 years ago, right? And Markel 12 years ago. And Markel had this idea of circle of justice, and he kind of argued and said, if I envision a world in which the victim and the assailant can have a conversation together, right? And it was weird, and it was. I sat there when I saw the verdict, and I thought to myself, what would Professor Markel say to Donna Adelson, right? If his world if his law school example existed, what would he say to the person that orchestrated and was a mastermind behind his murder and took him from his children? And so, as happy as I was to see her convicted, in that moment, all I could think about was Professor Markel, right? And the fact that, he's no longer here. So I got stuck, honestly. I was stuck thinking about Professor Markel because time passes, but when I saw that verdict come by, it's not how I felt that didn't matter, but how would he have felt? What would he have thought? What would have been his impression? And that's kind of where I caught myself. I almost honestly got stuck in that thought for a good while.
That's a very interesting point. And I asked Shelley Markel what Dan would have thought of his parents' victim impact statements, because they delivered them right then and there, and Phil kind of teared up. But look, there's no like victor here. I was just talking about with Ruth, but there's justice served. I'll tell you personally, that primal scream that Donna let out, hearing it from a 76-year-old woman, I mean, you reap what you sow, but it was still pretty chilling. And Webster, we got to get your take, obviously, because I haven't had you on since then. But before we get there, just back to the morning of July 18th. Now, I believe, and again, I was dealing with all kinds of technical issues when Stephen sort of shared this the first time about a week or so ago on the show. But that morning, apparently, I think Dan calls you, but you're on vacation or you're with your kids, and you're like, I've got to call you back. And then you go to call him back, and there's no answer. And then the police call you. Is that right? Can you just?
Yes. So he was supposed to call me at 9 a.m. Eastern, but I was in the Central Time Zone, so it was 8. And we were traveling for a baseball tournament, and I had my 2 daughters in the hotel room with me. My wife was getting ready, and my daughters were jumping on the beds and like going crazy. And I was like, Dan, I can't do this right now, but look, I'll get breakfast in these kids, get them in the car, put a movie on, they'll chill out. And then I can talk to you while I'm in the truck and then in the car, a better way to do it. So I said, I'll call you back. I think I said 10 a.m. I can't remember, but shortly before I was going to call him, my wife decided she needed to go to a mall. And so I Googled, found a mall outside of Hoover, Alabama. It's kind of nice. And I said, that's actually even better because you can take the kids in the mall. I'll call Danny. But so I was about 15 minutes or 20 minutes later. I called him later than I originally intended. And I believe it was probably 30 plus minutes after he had been shot, based upon the timeline that I last heard from the state attorney's office. And he didn't answer, which was a little bit odd for me, and because it wasn't like him. And so then I still hadn't heard from him, and we were traveling again, and my phone rang, and it was a police officer that I know, and had her in my phone by her first name. And so I just answered it real casually, and she basically said, how do you know Dan Markel? It shocked me. I couldn't process it for a second. And then I concluded that Wendy had made some sort of bogus allegation against Dan because Annie worked in violent crimes. And I had already warned Dan that I was concerned at some point, given her desire to relocate those children, the only avenue I saw for that to happen, short of murder, was if she accused him of like battery or something like that, and she got an injunction against him, and they got criminal charges filed, and then she could use all of that as leverage to get what she ultimately wanted. So I said, I don't want you around her, stay away from her. And so that's what I concluded maybe that police officer was calling me for. And then I said, he's my client. I want to talk to him. Actually, I said, what? I said, what? And she said, how do you know Dan Markel? Like, it was like very aggressive. And that was when I reached my conclusion. I said, he's my client. I want to talk to him. She said, you can't talk to him. I said, yes, I can. He's my client. I want to talk to him. And then she said, I think at that point she knew that I had absolutely no idea. I mean, I guess I was kind of a suspect at that point when she was calling me. I don't know, I'm calling his phone right after he shot.
Well, you're probably the last number or very close to it in his phone, right?
Probably. I mean, I can't imagine how many people called in that 30-minute interim.
Mm.
And so, and certainly she probably thought I had information, but she said at that point, her tone changed completely. And she said, you can't, because something really bad has happened to him. And so that was how, at that moment, I knew they killed him. But that was how I found out that this was all happening.
Wow. And were you able to stay? Like, I mean, how did you process that at the time? I mean, you're a very sensitive guy. I'm sure you were just broken.
I don't remember anything after that. I don't remember how we hung up. I don't remember if I asked her any questions. I don't remember if she told me anything else. I don't remember anything else after that, after she said those words. And it's kind of weird because I wonder, did I ask her anything else? But the whole rest of that day was just, I was in a daze. I think I probably called Louis and spoke to Louis. I don't remember that, Lou, if I did, but I'm sure we talked probably. Louis would have been the first person I would have called. But we traveled to the hotel where the baseball tournament was, and I was just in a daze. I'm a pacer. I pace around. And I just remember I was outside by the pool, and I was just like pacing and thinking. And I would look over and I would see like all of the family members and the teammates and stuff. They were like all over there kind of congregating and having a good time. And I was just over there like in a daze.
Wow. So Louis, I got to ask you, do you remember Stephen calling you that day? Did he call you that day?
I'll never forget when he called me. I was on the couch. I think I was getting ready to play Call of Duty, or maybe on a PlayStation 5. I remember I remember the street I was on. I remember where it was, where I was standing. And, again, because when he called me, he's like, hey, bad news. And I'm like, and I think he indicated to me Professor Markel was gone. And I'm like, gone where? Like, gone to a new law school, right? Like, gone to a new job, gone to a new career, and I think he said it again. And it kind of, I'm like, what are you talking about? And I think he said, no, he's dead. And I was just stuck. I remember thinking it's impossible. It's not, that doesn't make sense. And now how, and I think he said, well, it seems like something bad happened, which of course to me at that point, I've interpreted to mean, okay, it's some kind of violent crime. And I couldn't rationalize Professor Markel. No one deserves to be no one deserves to be murdered. No one deserves to be killed. But reality is that Professor Markel lived his life in a way that didn't expose him to those type of risk, if that can mean anything. He didn't live a life, right? I do criminal defense. And so I know people who live lives in a way where you expose yourself to certain things happening to you. Professor Markel didn't do that. He didn't live like that. He didn't speak like that. He didn't walk like that. He didn't talk like that. It wasn't him. He was a positive person. And so I was stuck at the idea that such a positive person could be snatched away. I remember vividly the exact.
Did you know that he? I mean, also, being friends, obviously, with, I don't know if you guys were partners at that point, but did you know he was having like this contentious divorce? And is that something that you thought was, part of this, part of why he ended up dead?
No. So at the time, I think, and Webster can speak to this too, when I learned this much years later, when Professor Markel recommended me to Webster, he did it on a condition. The condition was that Webster had to create a Chinese wall, which is a legal term, and screen me away from his case. And so I didn't know his case was going on. I didn't know that there was a divorce. Nevertheless, the contention level, the animosity that existed in the divorce, even though I was at the office working right next to the file, walking in, Webster did a pretty good job, which, now I wonder how, if I'm honest, I don't know. It must have been important for him to keep it away from me. But I didn't know anything about it until maybe a week after his death was the first time I learned of how contentious the divorce was.
And Louis, I interviewed juror 5 and 6, and I'm going to interview the jury 4 person that's going to be under the video tab. I'm doing that after the show. But juror 6, who's like 25 years old, says that this case affected him so much sitting on the jury that he started school late. He went in, spoke to his professor, and changed his track to pre-law. He wants to go to law school now. The irony that Dan Markel was a law professor, and now this guy just sat on his jury for his murder and was so moved by it that he now wants to become a criminal defense attorney. He's one of the smartest, next to you, Louis, one of the smartest young guys that I've talked to recently. What do you think? Dan would sort of be smiling down about that, I think.
Yes, I think it's clear he would. Here's what we know about Professor Markel is that he was a top lawyer at a big 14 firm, right? At a tier 1 firm. He did that. He excelled in it. He was great at it. He operated in the big markets, New York, DC. He already did that. We know that he was an accomplished author, right? We know that he'd written law reviews and articles that were published in law reviews across the country. Professor Markel had all the accolades. What does that mean? That tells us that Professor Markel was teaching because he wanted to. It wasn't a job for him, right? He wasn't, I can imagine with his pedigree and his skill set that he could have went other places and made way more money. And so it clearly he wasn't missing a dollar. And so it's clear to me as a student, all those years ago, that he had a passion for what he did. So the idea that another person would go into the career is amazing. Here's what else I'll add. A lot of professors don't like teaching the 1Ls, right? They like teaching the 2Ls and the 3Ls because you're not dealing with the freshness. We're green, we're wet behind the ears. Not Professor Markel, right? He had big 1L sections and he poured in. He dug in with 2 hands as if it was dirt and as if in our brains were the soil. He dug in completely to shape us. And so he'd be happy at the idea of another lawyer, and he'd tell him how great Florida State is as a law school.
Yeah. Louis only has till the top of the hour, which is like 24 minutes. I'm going to go a little Louis heavy. Then we're going to get back to Webster, and hopefully Webster will stick around a little bit, take some questions on the tail end. But one of the things that annoyed the crap out of me, Louis, is that Jackie Fulford, who's a story unto herself, the defense attorney, from opening statement, she appropriated Danny's nickname. Typically in court, you hear Professor Markel, Mr. Markel, but yes, soon I will have interviewed all of Tallahassee if I stay up long enough. What were Lewis's thoughts on the defense saying? So she started calling him Danny, and it just got under my skin. And I become very close with Phil. I was talking to Phil a lot during the trial. I could see he did not like it. I asked him, he did not like it. Your thoughts on a defense attorney appropriating a nickname, I guess, to the benefit of the jurors. And I spoke to the jurors who didn't like it either.
Yeah, so I think I respect, Jackie, but I think it was a bad decision, and I think it was disrespectful, right? Having met his mother, met his father, talked to his sister, I still would not call Professor Markel Danny, right? You're not going to hear me go around saying Danny. That's not something I'm going to say, right? Having talked about him and all these years later, having been a full-time lawyer now myself, I'm still not going to call him Danny, right? It's the level of familiarity. It is not there, right? To call him that is something that you had to earn. And there's no doubt that your client did everything in the world to not earn it. If there's anyone on planet Earth that doesn't deserve the right to address him by an affectionate nickname, it's no doubt Donna Adelson. We know that because we see the emails where she's suggesting despicable things, even unto herself and her own beliefs, just to hurt Professor Markel. And so, and she knew those emails were going to come into evidence. There's no doubt about that. And so there's no world in which it would ever be reasonable, intelligent, practical. There's no other term I can think of for you to appropriate, because that's what that is, right? What we saw was appropriate. You appropriated a name that was creative out of affection, and you appropriated to a person that hated the ground Professor Markel walked on, right? Hated everything he stood for, everything he believed in, and you appropriated it for your use. Again, I think I don't think there's anything else you can say that is more disrespectful than that, right? If you want to call him Mr. Dan, you want to call him Mr. Markel, you want to call him Professor. Hey, he has a doctorate, call him doctor. But to call him Danny, even Dan is too familiar. Even to say Dan, right? Danny, of course, is another level, but even to call him Dan, it's after I met Professor Markel in 2013. Here we are in September of 2025, and I'm still not going to say Dan. And I've been on this show every bit of 5 times. If you go back, you're not going to hear me say Dan, right? That's not something I'm going to say. And so, and I'm not surprised to learn that juror didn't like it, right? This is a murder case. This isn't a battery case. This isn't a domestic violence case. This is a murder case where it's alleged a hitman was hired and a conspiracy was developed to take a person off planet Earth. That's what this is. This isn't, oh, we're friends. Hey, Danny. And so I know I'm kind of going on this. I think that it was so offensive. It's hard to stop.
Yeah, I would agree with you on that. Dodd Guidici here.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No.
Can I just add one thing?
Yeah, please.
All right. Everybody saw right there, Louis Baptiste. That's the man that Dan Markel brought into my life and is now my law partner, my brother on this earth until I'm no longer on this earth. And that's the beautiful gift that Dan delivered into my life, right before he was murdered. But then I was thinking about it last night and I was like, not only is Louis this beautiful gift for me, he's this beautiful gift for my family, and all of my friends who have gotten to know Louis. But then I was like, but Dan also delivered into my life David Akintande, one of Louis's best friends on this planet, who is, I love like a brother, one of the best, most beautiful human beings I'll ever know on this planet. He delivered into my life CJ, Matt, and I had the names in my head earlier. Now they're escaping me, and I apologize. Derek, so many of these amazing, wonderful friends that I have now that are also a product of Dan Markel introducing me to Louis. So he enriched my life in a way that your viewers could never, ever understand. But you just had a chance to kind of hear Louis Baptiste. You've had a chance to kind of see the beauty in his soul that Dan delivered to me. But then it goes beyond that, because of all of my entire network of friends has been shaped and changed because of Dan Markel. And I just want to say that to the Markel family, if they ever hear this, I thank you so much. I'll be forever grateful to your family for it. And I know Louis probably feels the same way. And Dan, wherever you are, if you can hear this, I can't tell you how much I appreciate the gift that you gave me. And I hope you can at least be proud of it.
Nothing to say to follow that up. That just said it all. Doc Guidici here with the super chat. Webster, this is going back to all the information about this fraud. Why wasn't this used in the Donna Adelson trial? I listened to Dan's lawyer on this podcast afterwards, and it was just so powerful. Maybe they just didn't need it. Is that something that they didn't need, or that they just, I don't know.
I don't know if they ever intended to use any of that here or ever, but I do think they had me under subpoena, but I think something happened. I don't know what, because I wasn't watching the trial, but something happened kind of early on, first couple of days. And Sarah Catherine kind of reached out to me and said, we may not use you, but we're just going to keep you on standby. And I kind of concluded, and my wife has kind of turned around and said it. My wife watched the trial, and she believes it, that I think my wife believes it was Rob Adelson. His testimony, I think they thought it landed, and I wasn't there, so I can't read the jurors' faces, but Georgia Kappelman and Sarah Catherine clearly read the room, and they were obviously right. And I think they knew, and if you're winning, then stop, and so I think that's probably what it came down to. And then my wife said that she felt like the lawyer's testimony was just kind of so ridiculous that she didn't even need me to come in and try to push back on that, because I could have done that. This crazy testimony that divorces aren't contentious, and this one wasn't contentious. And but then my wife said, they don't even need it. Almost looks just so desperate that they put them on to say all that stuff, that it's almost better just to leave it there with just a complete desperation. So I think that's what it is. And they were right. They didn't need me.
Yeah. And Georgia, by the way, and Sarah Catherine Dugan, in writing for news, you call it like the economy of words. Well, she's very economical with what she needs in terms of her cross or her direct, and she probably didn't need it, and she probably knew that. But Louis, to you, and I was going to ask this of Stephen, and we can get Stephen's follow-up, and he kind of just alluded to it. So both jurors I interviewed already said that it was an unmitigated disaster as well to bring on these two divorce attorneys. They just did not help defense's case. One was Wendy's divorce attorney, Kristen Adamson, and the other was Linda Bailey, who seems to be more offensive. But Kristen Adamson, and this is direct quote, she said the initial divorce proceedings were not contentious. There were moments where it was contentious, but nobody yelled or screamed or cried, all very appropriate. And she was basically talking very broadly about divorce, and then specifically about this case, a little more specifically. But I made this analogy, like my brother-in-law is a cardiologist. If you are going in for angioplasty, it is the biggest moment of your life. You don't know if you're going to live, you're going to die. For my brother-in-law, he does it every day. It's routine. So for this divorce attorney, it's routine, but she just was so cold-hearted. So she just minimized that this was a very big deal, and it seemed to backfire. And then Linda Bailey was much more sort of obnoxious about it. But I'm just wondering your thoughts about bringing on, I think Kristen Adamson, who is Wendy's divorce attorney, was sort of a necessary evil. But again, the jurors said that they hurt the defense case. Your thoughts on having those two as witnesses?
I think it was a bad strategy, and I think it's just, what we saw is that the same thing we saw with Charlie Adelson's trial. We saw a bunch of bad strategies. And I think when you just have bad clients, it's hard to come up with good strategies. I think that everyone knows you don't have to look. I've never been through a divorce, and I pray that I never go through one. But I know that it's the worst. It's my worst nightmare, right? Everyone knows that going through a divorce, the idea of a good divorce is a fiction. And what that really means is that a good divorce is one where the drama level stays manageable. Not that drama doesn't exist, it's that it's manageable, right? That's the reality of it. And so I thought this theory they tried to create where it was, all, cherries and rainbows, right? And it was just it was the ice cream sundae of a divorce. I think it was horrible. I'm not surprised to learn that jurors thought it was horrible. I thought it was horrible when I was reading the reviews of the trial. I thought it made no sense, especially because of the evidence in the record. We know that, Judge Hobbs was there fighting against relocation, right? We know that Wendy wanted to relocate back. Relocation is the single most contentious thing, that exists in family law. There is no more contentious proceeding in family law than relocation. The hardest issue that a family law judge has to decide is relocation. It's not assets. That's easy. It's not child support. That's pretty easy. It's not time sharing. That's pretty easy, right? And I say this having been to family law court and having known family law judges and magistrates. Those things are not the hardest. The hardest thing that a family law judge does is decide relocation. Because when you decide relocation, you are effectively stripping a parent away. You're stripping a parent of the meaningful ability to connect with their child on a day-to-day basis. That's gone, right? And that's what family law judges have told me. They told me it's the hardest thing they do. And we know that was a major issue here. We know that Wendy wanted to relocate back to Miami. We know
and Louis, we found out, sorry to interrupt, but we find out in this trial that, that she's talking, Wendy now is talking about how Donna had no idea, but you find out she had emailed and Donna did know about the loss of this, relocation filing. Is that a problem for Wendy moving forward? She's kind of perjured herself there.
I think it is for sure. I think she tested. I think she was subpoenaed for some of that testimony, and so whether or not they can use those exact statements against her, it's going to be a whole nother legal issue. But I do think that it shows you how ridiculous that entire ordeal is. It shows you how much of a liar Wendy is, and at the same time, it shows you how ridiculous any idea that you could have that this was in any way a peaceful divorce when you had Professor Markel trying to limit Donna Adelson's ability to be unsupervised with his children. What about that is peaceful, right? Or not contentious, right? And so I think that if there wasn't the emails and there wasn't the record, that testimony could have made sense. But the defense lawyers, they had the evidence, they had the discovery. And so when I'm looking at the discovery, I'm throwing a big X on that defense because there's explicit emails that cut against it. And so I think it was just the jury realized correctly that that dog didn't hunt.
Yeah. And Webster, so then Linda Bailey gets up. She's this family law attorney who I don't know if you know or not. But she testified that the divorce, and I quote here, was settled amicably and everybody was moving on with their lives. She described the divorce process as, quote unquote, much more amicable than many cases that I see. And then on the quote unquote grandmother motion, which was the post-divorce filing seeking to limit Donna Adelson's unsupervised visits with the children, she said it was Donna was kind of taken aback that a lawyer would have signed that. She was just really downplaying everything. And then she got into the fact that $80,000 isn't a lot of money. And the jurors, much more so than Kristen Adamson, they simply did not like Linda Bailey. And I'm just wondering what you thought about her testimony, because it was sort of bordering on offensive.
Bordering? Well, I would just ask Miss Bailey, and how many of those clients with these divorce proceedings that were far more contentious than this one, how many of them were murdered by the opposing party's family members? See, I feel like murder is kind of exhibit A and case closed for proof that this was a contentious divorce. I mean, when she was sitting there on that stand offering that testimony, Charlie Adelson was sitting somewhere in a jail cell, having been convicted of conspiring to murder Dan. Charlie didn't do that because Dan, was a bad professor. He didn't do that because Dan was a bad father. He did that because of the way Dan was fighting Wendy in the divorce proceeding and winning in the divorce proceeding. So that, for me, kind of takes it to the contentious level in and of itself. When you kill the other party, I think it's contentious. It's just ridiculous. I can't believe that she would kind of get up there and discredit herself that way. I don't, anyway, but the proof's in the pudding. The jurors hated it, and it's clear they hated it. I mean, when a jury comes back on a first-degree murder case that's, a week long, a week's worth of evidence having been presented, and they come back in 3 hours and 18 minutes with a guilty verdict, that's a message. Okay. That's a message loud and clear. We totally reject your defense, and you failed completely 100% in the defense. And that's not to impugn even Josh and Jackie's capabilities, because like Louis said, they had nothing to work with. Their client murdered Dan, and she participated in it, and the evidence is clear. So, I'm not even saying but putting her on just didn't help anything. And I think it probably made it that much faster that they rendered that guilty verdict.
Yeah, we just lost Louis there. one of the jurors said that they just didn't even follow. It was the so-called sprinkler man, juror number 5 yesterday. He couldn't even follow. He just simply couldn't follow Jackie's opening statement. So starting there, it's a bad place to be. Webster, just a quick answer to this. I'll get back to Louis with the remaining moments that he has. But could the fraud motion have resulted in Wendy losing her bar license? Could that have been?
I do. I think that's the kind of conduct you can get disbarred over. So.
Interesting. So that could have raised the stakes. Louis, to you, I mean, without a doubt, the star witness, I think. It's interesting. In talking to the jurors, they cited 2 witnesses. One, I was a little surprised by because to me, I don't know. I feel like it was Sergeant Chris Corbett with the digital forensics. I just feel like the average Joe or Jane are going to tune out some digital forensics. But both jurors I talked to said he was an essential witness. But the other one, Rob Adelson, and I don't know if you got to see Rob, Louis, but one of the only good egg apparently in that family, had the courage and the bravery to get up there. Just wondering your thoughts on him providing that testimony. And I asked George about it, and she said, look, I did everything in my power not to have Rob testify until we really needed him, and we needed him in this case.
I think it's first of all, a heck of a person and a human being. You have to take a bow to him for the courage that he had to take that stand, right? Like, I think like you and I share in that we're both mama's boys. I'm a big mama's boy. I wear it on my sleeve. It's hard for my mom to do wrong, not by me at least. And so that's the lens from which I view this. His testimony, right? That Donna Adelson and the family were so bad that you caused a biological connection that goes above anything. The mother and son connection is something that you can't explain. That science still can't explain why it exists, why there's such a deep connection. And you manage to sever that enough or be such a person that you're a person who was created inside of you, created in you, felt compelled to take this stand reluctantly, because that was the biggest part about his testimony, is how true it was. He wasn't up there with, in my opinion, he didn't have an axe to grind. I didn't when I listened to it, it didn't sound like a person with an axe to grind. It sounded like a person that was doing the hardest thing they ever would have to do. But because truth mattered to him, he felt like he had no choice but to do it, because truth and justice weren't just words for Rob. They were bigger. They meant more. And so it literally speechless. As I watched him testify, I sat there speechless, without the ability to say a word, big word, small word, because his testimony was so honest and it was so compelling that without doubt, I would agree that what Webster said, they realized they had what they needed. And a good lawyer moves once you get what you need. His testimony was so strong that, you know, it almost makes you wonder. The fact that they convicted Charlie without him just shows you how guilty Charlie is. Because the idea that they chose not to use his testimony in that trial is like insane, right? Because we now know how compelling the testimony was, right? And so this is like, you know, if you go to Vegas, you don't fold on pocket aces, right? It's almost like, you know, Charlie Adelson, I mean, Rob Adelson in the weird way, he's pocket aces. You know what I mean? He's that strong of a witness, and they chose not to use him. And so, I mean, I can't put in words how compelling, how strong, how honest, how raw, how real his testimony came off.
Yeah. Louis has like 2-3 minutes. I'll ask you this question instead of to Stephen. Do Attorney Webster or Baptiste, Attorney Baptiste, think that Mr. Webster's testimony, do you think your partner and your friend's testimony about Wendy's fraud would be damaging if they bring charges upon Wendy? In other words, would Webster be, he wasn't called in this trial. If Wendy was indicted, does Webster get called? And Louis, I got to ask you, does Wendy get indicted next? Georgia said, stay tuned.
So I think honestly, before this trial, I'd always told you I didn't know. If you go back to the shows, I said I didn't know was my answer. I think after this trial, I would lean towards a yes, right? I think the evidence that we saw in this trial, when you add it up, it shows a clear picture that that 100% she's what Georgia called an unindicted co-conspirator, that she was a co-conspirator in this, right? That makes it very clear. Secondly, I do think Webster's testimony is critical because he provides a piece of information that's not really out there, right? The world and the world of Markel, they don't know the money grubbing side of Wendi Adelson, right? That's the part that we don't see, right? We know, the Miami, the Adelsons are rich. That's what you think of. You think of a rich family, right? You think of the intercoastal, a Ferrari, condos with celebrities. You think of a rich family, right? You don't know the side of Wendi that wanted to hide, steal assets in a divorce so that she could keep more money that wasn't hers while trying to take money that she wasn't entitled to, right? That's an entire part of Wendi that's not known, that doesn't exist. And I don't think there's the only better witness than Webster to that is no longer here, and that's Professor Markel. He's the only other person that was privy to as much of that greed as anyone else. 3 people know that well: Professor Markel, Stephen Webster, and Wendi Adelson. And she clearly isn't going to testify against herself. And so I think his testimony would be critical to show that side, the greedy, money grubbing, that side of her.
And there was some breadcrumbs that were dropped by, Jackie and Josh's defensive Donna was anyone but Donna, and they were throwing Wendi and Charlie under the bus. But Georgia and Sarah also offered up some new breadcrumbs. Was there anything that stuck out to you as being a new piece of evidence or a large breadcrumb that could work against Wendi and in the state's favor?
I don't know that any one piece stood out. I think I do agree with the juror that Chris Corbett, I think that his timeline, the travel and movements of cell phones, I thought that was critical. I thought, I think he's done it before. He's done it in every trial. I'm not sure why in this one it felt like it just broke. I mean, sometimes, you hear it and it just sounds better to you. I think this is one of the times where his testimony was more compelling to me in this trial than it was in the previous cases. Even though Chris Corbett is, you get with him what you get. He's pretty standard, and he's good at what he does. But I think his testimony was somewhat compelling, extremely compelling. Obviously, Rob Adelson was the biggest thing, I think. I think if you ask anybody, he has to be the biggest new factor, right? Mm-hmm. I think some emails I didn't know about, I saw, you know what I mean? About what communications between Wendi and Donna and what they knew. Some of that stuff I didn't know about, or maybe I missed before, but I knew about that. And so I think those were probably the 3 things I would suggest. I think it's just the state has shown, though, that the level of crime here, the level of callousness was at such a level that it's impossible that Wendi Adelson did not participate. That the evidence suggests that it's impossible that she was not a co-conspirator, that she didn't take a step in furtherance. The text messages, when is Dan going to be in town? When is he not going to be in town? Where is he going? Yeah. That stuff is so critical. I mean, and it's so
also,
strong.
Yeah. And also Jeff Lacasse trying to pin. I mean, there's too many things already. I think, and the jurors, by the way, I asked them, and they think that there's enough right now, and we don't know. By the way, this comment right here that Georgia has evidence we know nothing about. Louis, I'm just getting nervous because I know you have to go, and I know you like to end the show in a particular way. So your final thoughts here, Louis Baptiste.
I appreciate it. Obviously, I think every time I end this show and every time I in anywhere when I talk about Professor Markel, it's always my request that Professor Markel be remembered as a father, because I believe that's what he was the best at, that was his most important job, or his calling was being a father. I tell everybody that law reviews, Prof's blog, New York Times, Harvard, Oxford, that wasn't what was on his wall. On his door to his office were drawings, and to him, they were Picassos. To me, the kid got lost with the crayon. But that was what the top of his door, to the bottom of his door, of his 7-foot door, was drawings of his two sons made, because that's what mattered to him, right? Before being a professor, an attorney, a lawyer, he was a father. And so I ask that we remember Professor Markel as a father. And I always ask that we pray for his boys, because of all this, Professor Markel, and I have no doubt when I say this, Professor Markel would care way more about the health, the strength, the welfare of his two boys than he would care about the prosecutions of the Adelsons. I know that because what mattered to him most was being a dad. And so I send prayers to his two boys, that God will bless them and protect them and cover them. And because of all this drama, right? Like, their grandma was just convicted of murder of their dad. That's what just happened. That's what they have to live with. And so I pray their peace, because I know that Professor Markel would be praying for their peace and their health and their strength. And so I remember him as a father more than anything else, even though I engaged with him as a professor. He made sure that I knew he was a father first. Thank you.
And Louis was not a father back then, but Louis is a father now, and I'm sure he learned lessons from Dan Markel, Professor Dan Markel. Louis, you're the man. Appreciate you coming on. We'll get you back on soon. Have a great night.
Thank you.
And Webster, you mind sticking around for like 15? We'll take some questions. And I just want to run through the morning of the crime, because that's what the thumbnail is all about. And here at STS, we never, ever have clickbait. So at one point, Stephen, Wendy does, and Louis just mentioned this, she texts Dan and is looking curiously. And this is a text. Now, Harvey's birthday is July 5th, and she texts Dan the day after Harvey's birthday. And we all know that there was a birthday gift, which is, they believe, code word for the murder. So a day after Harvey's birthday, she texts Dan asking if he was going to be on Tallahassee on the dates July 14th to the 18th, specifically requesting the 16th, aligning exactly with when the hitmen rented their car. I mean, this is evidence against Wendy. I mean, how damning is this moving forward? I mean, to me, I feel like they already have a case, and we don't know what we don't know, but we do know what we have.
Yeah, I agree 100%. I mean, with all of the other, so quote unquote coincidences that have to line up in order for Wendy not to have any foreknowledge, this is another one that I just don't think she can get past. It was also critical. She was also really amped up and, wanting to know if Jeff was going to go out of town, and because I do believe that she was trying to leave Jeff out there as a suspect, frame him, not that I think that she thought he would get arrested and prosecuted. I don't think she thought it would go that far, but she didn't need it to go that far. All the Adelsons needed was reasonable doubt in their minds. And so if Jeff Lacasse is around and he causes enough confusion and makes it unsettling enough that they can't land on any particular suspect, and that was clearly what I think Wendy was striving for. But one of your commenters put it up there, and that was, for me, it was another, like maybe the biggest new kind of piece of evidence, maybe not the biggest, but a big new piece of evidence, was the fact that Donna had Danny's license plate number and car information written in her 2014 day planner. Because I don't think Donna took her day planner up here to Dan's house and stood out and behind his car and scribbled down the plate information. I think somebody probably gave that information to her.
To me, that I agree with you. To me, that is the biggest new piece of evidence, that Donna's day planner has Dan's 2008 Honda Accord license plate number. I mean, Webster, where else is Donna getting that? She's not driving up to Tallahassee, right?
For some reason, I feel like somebody probably called her and gave her that information from Tallahassee. And I know Donna's got a large social network up here in Tallahassee. She loves it so much here. But I'm guessing probably the most likely person who did that was Wendy.
Yeah. And that's not where it ends. On July 6th, that same day that she texts Dan trying to figure out where he's going to be around the time of the murder, she creates a calendar entry, and I quote here, "Cancel cable and get Netflix Apple ID," because it sounds like she's getting ready to move and setting up that TV repair appointment. All this stuff is being done ahead of the day that Dan is killed. Isn't that odd?
Yeah, it really is. And I think even, I don't think it's come out. I don't know if it's come out in affirmative evidence, but the scuttlebutt around here was that, she was all packed and out of that place in like 48 hours or less than 48 hours. And, it's kind of hard to go from devastated and emotionally distraught to, okay, let's get the U-Haul and let's pack everything up and go, so yeah.
One other thing here, and then we'll get, if you guys have any questions right now is the time. I'll scoot to the end and maybe get Webster a couple, but it's been a long few weeks for everybody here. The timeline on the day of the murder, Stephen Webster, 9:04, Dan leaves a very nice voicemail about picking up the boys, mentioning the gym. 9:12, Wendy and Dan exchange texts disputing or arguing over custody and pickup. 9:13 to 9:19 that morning, Wendy calls Charlie for 18 minutes. She probably hasn't spoken to him for 18 minutes, and I don't know how long, about the TV repair, man. Then 9:20, Dan texts Wendy saying he was being nice, relating to the custody pickup. And then she texts about an hour and 20 minutes before the murder. She texts, and this is so chilling to me, and I quote, "Nice was fun while it lasted." You can read that a bunch of ways, but that sounds like she knew, to me, that something was coming. That arguably is as damning a piece of evidence as there is. It's also cold as hell, Stephen Webster.
Yeah, I think so. It's kind of similar to me, to the Brian Koberger, and I think that I have this correct. I didn't follow that like really closely, but I'm pretty sure, didn't he take a picture, like a selfie of himself, like after the murders with a thumbs up?
Yeah.
To me, that's kind of reminiscent of that. That's how I take that. And it's kind of like Wendy, man. Like there's a double entendre there, because nice could be a play on their relationship was nice, but it also can be a play on it. I'm no longer playing nice. I'm not playing nice anymore.
100%. And the jurors who I talked to, like I said, if you go back and you watch the interviews, they think that there is enough right now, and we don't know. So Stephen Webster, man, I can't thank you enough. He's as good a guy as he is an attorney. The Markels are living through this hell. Some people say, oh, Wendy won't get indicted. Some say she will. Harvey, that's a whole other story. That guy creeped me out. I think everyone who watches this show knows. There's no way, in my opinion, that guy did not know what was happening, especially as it relates to the money, because he is frugal, literally buying a one-way ticket to Vietnam when he could have afforded a private jet if he wanted to. But what was this experience like? I know you were kind of preoccupied. You didn't know if you're going to be a witness. You couldn't watch a lot of it. But what was this trial like, I guess, compared to the other trials for you?
Well, with the information that I've kind of gleaned afterwards, it was a very crisp presentation by the state. I think they streamlined. They mentioned Chris Corbett, and I heard from a good friend of mine had texted me at one point and said the jury is skews very young. Was what my friend told me, and that, think how important Chris Corbett is for a younger generation, right? I mean, and CSI messed up everything. I mean, even when I was working as a prosecutor back in the early 2000s, CSI really did make our lives miserable, man, right? Like people come in like, okay, where's the DNA and where's the forensic audit and all? I'm like, man, we're the Second Circuit State Attorney's Office, all right? We don't have tablecloths on our table. So, so I mean, to have, I think, and I get maybe Georgia and Sarah Catherine, maybe that was part of their strategy, but I mean, it's brilliant because, those younger jurors, I mean, that's what they're going to eat up. And frankly, it is compelling. I mean, Chris is very thorough. So, like Louis said, I do take satisfaction in justice being achieved. Okay. I'm desperate for it. I have been for, 11 plus years. All right. And I remember, as the days were ticking by and nothing was happening, and I wasn't consuming media. I had like Good Morning America would call my office every morning, but I wouldn't even watch the media on it because I didn't want to like kind of confuse my memories. And that's what I was genuinely worried about if I was needed as a witness. So I had no idea that this movement had been formed for, Justice for Dan. I had no idea. I didn't find that out until 2016, when they finally made arrests, because that was when the dam kind of burst for me. I was like, okay, like I need to kind of like know what's going on. So I take enormous satisfaction. But for me, like I was sitting out there kind of feeling alone in the wilderness on it. And I had some contact with the Markels, which gave me, some kind of satisfaction a little bit. But I can't tell you how important the movement is for me, because every life that's taken like this deserves a movement like this. And our world should stand up for everybody who was killed and murdered like this. It doesn't happen. We realize that's not really practical, but man, it sure feels good for me that the murder that impacted my life the most just so happens to be the same murder where this movement is there to offer me comfort, because it does offer me comfort, enormous comfort, that people still care. Dan's life still matters, and people are still demanding justice along with me. And, so that is one of the things I take away. But so and that's where my satisfaction comes. But like Louis said, at the end of the day, this stuff still hurts the children. It still injures the people that matter the most to Dan. And so it's hard to compartmentalize that. And the only way I can do it is kind of just how you said, Ruth said it to you. It's justice is important and it has to be done. So unfortunately, whatever, those repercussions are, that just has to be the case. It just has to.
Yeah. And I just want to underscore the fact that, we talked to Georgia in the press conference post verdict, and she did say, I mean, to Stephen's point, that it weighs on her heavily that she understands she's putting away someone's grandmother for the rest of her life, but that justice has to be served. And the implication is that they are possibly going to do this very soon. If you watch Charlie's trial, after Charlie's trial, she said, stay tuned. And then they got Donna. And this time around, she said to stay tuned twice. Powerful stuff. So we will see how it all turns out. But Webster, you are a gentleman and scholar. You've gone for us above and beyond. I understand why you love Louis the way you do. He's an awesome guy. Appreciate you being here, man.
Absolutely. And I wanted to get it out tonight, that because I thought about it last night. I was like, Louis, the gift that he has got, I mean, it's just incredible. But what your viewers don't see, are all his friends. I'm telling you, David Akintande, shout out to you, my man, down there in Orlando. I mean, I'd walk over coals for him. I'd crawl over coals for him. I mean, he's such an important person to me and my family. So, Dan's impact is enormous just in Louis, but it's so much even bigger than that. And thank you, Dan.
There's nothing ever to say after either Webster or Louis says something. So on that note, love you, America. Love you, Tallahassee. Justice for Dan Markel always. We'll see you guys. Trying to get, I think we have a woman who served time for murder, roughly around Donna's age, trying to get her on the show for tomorrow at 12:30. Live show tomorrow at 12:30 p.m. Eastern. See you then. Love you all.